Today, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Jane Meyers. She is a professional librarian with over 45 years of experience in consulting, teaching, and working with African libraries, including participation in UNESCO workshops to formulate national library and information policies in Malawi and Zambia, sorry. She developed a network of research libraries for Malawi's Ministry of Agriculture on a World Bank project and pioneered technology and applications for Africa in the 1980s. Jane worked at the U.S. National Agricultural Library, USAID, and later developed agricultural information and services at the World Bank, which led to the establishment of the World Bank Library. Today, Jane will discuss her work establishing the Librarian Library Partners established in 2005. Jane?
Just to quickly introduce what this is, it's Librarian Library Partners is the organization that I founded, and 20 years ago, this is our 20th anniversary. And it's a nonprofit registered here in the United States and in Zambia, the country where we are working, or starting at least. And we build public libraries just focused on children and youth that are like the public libraries you see here in this country, except they are appropriate in the Zambian context, and they are just focused on children and youth because those are the people in the population who are left out. There's inadequate schools for everybody, so there are lots and lots of kids who are not in school. These libraries support especially are there for the most vulnerable young people, includes the ones that are out of school, children with disabilities, and young mothers who are living on the streets. But they're for everyone. That on the right-hand side is Kenneth Kaunda, the founding president of Zambia since their independence, and he was at the opening of our first library. That's what this picture is from, and our second library as well. So we've had the most revered former head of state help us introduce these libraries. And I guess what, people may have heard about library projects in different places. Ours, I think, is a little bit different. I mean, it is professionally driven, which I think is an important distinction, but we are also something that hasn't been imposed from the outside. I mean, places like UNESCO and others tried that 50 years ago or so. Let's have libraries in these places, and it's sort of top-down development. And as you know, I think, as everyone kind of knows, in recent years, there's a lot of criticism about why that kind of thing doesn't work if you don't really know the environment. That to do something effective that's really going to be helping people, it has to become, I mean, you do need some top-down support, like from President Kaunda, but also it has to come from the bottom up, and you have to know who you're helping and what they need. So we are really emphasizing that this genuinely is a grassroots project, organization. And so we started this 20 years ago, actually building from about 5 years prior to that experience working with vulnerable kids in Africa. The other thing that's unusual about this, and it's, I am absolutely certain that the good practice of international development is exactly the same as the good practice of librarianship. You need to know who you're serving. You need to work from that point backwards. And it's just the same as starting a business that's effective too. You need to understand your market and what they need and who they are. But we're kind of lucky that we didn't just get a big chunk of money from the Gates Foundation or someplace like that and just made a plan for this is what we're going to do. We've learned so much along the way by going step by step and getting support getting support in Zambia, which is growing. And we are very, very much working toward having this model supported by the Zambian business community as well. But that just doesn't happen overnight. You have to build trust and understanding. And so we've had a bit of a long history now, and we've learned a lot of lessons, hard ones along the way. And I'm going to sort of run through that quickly. The people often say, where is Labuto? Labuto is actually a word in the language Bemba, which is spoken locally, and it means light and enlightenment and knowledge. And the name has become particularly sort of poignant recently because Zambia has been having a problem of power cuts, people having power out for up to 23 hours a day or 22 hours a day, and living in a big city where a fire isn't an alternative for how you're going to prepare your food, etc. It's that we have in the middle of the capital city a library that is totally solar powered, thanks to the U.S. American Schools and Hospitals Abroad program, and it has a high-speed satellite Starlink internet connection. Light is what this oasis has become. People flocking to our libraries for that. So, as I mentioned, our founding did come from years of working with vulnerable children and libraries and my library colleagues in Malawi. I was living in Malawi on a World Bank project. And then 10 years later, our family returned to Zambia, the neighboring country, because my husband got a post there as the International Monetary Fund's representative. And so there I could just look around and see what needs to be done. And Zambia is the country hardest hit by orphaning due to the HIV/AIDS pandemic, the hardest hit in terms of the percentage of children ages 14 and under who were orphaned because of AIDS. So there were street kids everywhere, no one knowing what to do with them. And I just started to read to them at a drop-in shelter for street kids. And all of that sort of eventually grew into what we're doing. There are just lots and lots of kids. There needed to be a solution to this. So the insight that drove the creation of this organization is that public libraries can be a solution. And I eventually started just a little collection of materials in a shipping container and brought in my colleagues in the Zambia Library Service. And we left this little library there in the middle of a drop-in center in the middle of this big, crazy city. And just learned later from different colleagues passing through that it not only was sustained and being cared for, but that kids were getting into secondary school because of what they could do in this library. And there's a bigger story about that, but and I didn't believe, I mean, we didn't expect that. I figured this is just gonna, whatever, go to the wayside. And so what came to us, I mean, after our family returned to the United States was these stories. And so I went around, tried to interest groups like Save the Children and the Academy for Educational Development and other places to do something with libraries, but and so we realized that we had to start a nonprofit. I just like doing the library part, but the nonprofit had to be there. So the possibilities in thinking about this were sort of endless, and the whole situation was also pretty daunting. But at the same time, founding an organization here and getting lots of volunteers, and we've had hundreds of volunteers in the Washington area from schools and other places. We built library collections in the basement of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Northwest DC. And anyway, we had that going on here, and at the same time, we had to learn from everybody in Zambia about what we need. We had to build an organization and figure out how to finance it. We did all of that. So anyway, now 20 years on, we've had over 2 million visits to these libraries. We now have 4 libraries. 2 million visits by more than 250,000 young Zambians, and operate a network of 4 libraries in urban and rural villages with areas that average more than 5,000 visits a week. And maybe the visit isn't necessarily telling you what the impact is on all those individual kids. I mean, it's very hard for public libraries in this country or anywhere to show what their impact is because it's so diffuse. But here are libraries that didn't exist before. It's not easy for kids to necessarily be able to be at these libraries, and yet 5,000 times a week. they are going to it. So there is something there that really shows their value. The libraries have connected with over 72,000 Zambian children through outreach on the streets, schools, and community-based organizations and clinics and rural floodplains. We've trained over 500 teachers, student, and working librarians to provide extensive and accessible collections and library services to children. And we've provided important programming to over 25,000 young people. And I'll just quickly show you what some of that programming is. But again, as our purpose is that we have shown that libraries can fill many important gaps. This particular photo shows a group of young mothers celebrating their graduation from a hospitality training course they took through the Buto's Family Literacy Program. And there are all kinds of needs all over the place. And we particularly felt a desire to focus on the needs of these young girls who are married at an early age and have to quit school. And so, yeah, being able to make a livelihood is really important to them. So a key population we wanted to serve were the street kids that I mentioned earlier. We learned a lot about reaching and helping them through effective outreach. Just literally go out and find them and tell them about it. And then when they began to come to the library, we learned that the children could themselves become the experts in the use of technology that was specifically designed for them. The one laptop per child laptop. I don't know if any of you ever heard about that. That was something some years ago developed by a guy named Nicholas Negroponte. I learned about it when I was given the Dow Jones Leadership Award from the Special Libraries Association. And the technology editor of the Wall Street Journal was friends with this guy who invented these OLPC laptops. I believe they were used a lot in Guatemala, actually, the OLPCs. Anyway, they were designed for children to figure out themselves. And so they quickly discovered a simple programming app on the laptops called eToys that you could use for creating games and teaching. And we realized that we could take that app and bring in Zambian teachers to create. We created 100 lessons in each of the 7 major Zambian languages to teach children how to read. I mean, libraries here don't necessarily teach children how to read, but that was needed there. But again, it was based on something that children themselves discovered, which I think is really important. So we learned the need for so many of these out-of-school young mothers to learn to write and read in English, which is the official language of Zambia. They really couldn't get anywhere without learning English. So we started this program called the Family Literacy Program. And that was funded under a grant that was part of the PEPFAR program, actually, that you probably all have heard about in Zambia. Again, related to trying to stem the difficulty behind the spread of AIDS. And advance the slide, please. And then we started offering this family literacy program to the mothers. So they were all their children, and we needed to do something with their children. So we started, we had learned about some traditional ways that that children were cared for in some of the rural areas where we were working. And we began to develop a more formal approach to early childhood programming and early literacy programming. We built collections of books for the very youngest children. And now we have a creative play center and a baby laptop program using traditional songs. Because traditionally there was something that always happened in babies' minds from age 0 to 2. And we just took those traditions and made it a little more formal, including using books. And we're sharing screen. We developed this approach actually from an American Library Association has a program called All Children Ready to Read, and that's what's used. So this is on the right there. You can see the little play place, our creative play center, but also just mothers looking themselves, even maybe learning to read themselves, looking at books with their new young babies, taking what libraries know to do and uniquely do. I mean, preschools are really important now, and there's a lot of recognition about that, but they don't reach children under 2. And the one place, the one institution that I know of anywhere is public libraries. I don't know what I would have done with my babies if it hadn't been for the local public library. I mean, you need to have a place where you learn all the songs and look at all the books and everything else. And so this is what we really think is showing, especially showing people in Zambia, first of all, valuing their traditions. Once we started this program of singing, it's just become wildly popular. And this is just something that we really started a couple months ago. And all of a sudden, just everyone is wanting to come with their babies, and it is so much fun. Other things happened organically, kind of in the same way. We had a poster of the Zambian Sign Language. There is a special sign language just in Zambia. We put it up in one of our libraries. Immediately, the word got out to a deaf community that we had no idea was there. And then we did, I mentioned we had a pep talk that we were, this is called Dreams, and it was basically to help adolescent girls help reduce the HIV infection rate of adolescent girls. And we actually had some unusual success there that is could be attributed to how libraries know how to do programming. We would do counseling on getting tested for HIV. And I think the typical experience with that is that people fill out their form and they go off and they don't get tested. But we had a guy standing outside and another organization that we partnered with who could test them right away. And we had 100% referral completion rate, which was, I think we were the only ones in all of it. I think, you know, what you're clapping for, I hope, is that the power of libraries, because that's really the point of all this. We also learned that teenagers and young adults need their own space, and we learned that in pretty dramatic ways. And they also need their own things like graphic novels and coding classes, maker spaces, debate clubs, and video games. They just discovered that one of our games was a multiplayer one. Well, just what I wanted to say here was that every one of our programs, which include mentoring, art, drama, and story times, and fighting gender-based violence and child marriage, and early childhood education, targeted outreach, and skills-based maker spaces, every one of them grew in response to the needs of Zambia's young people. Also, we've just got really, really good books. And so there's something called the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, which is given out by the Swedish Arts Council. It's known as the Nobel Prize of Children's Literature. And we've been nominated for it 16 times. Oh. And you might think that's not great. You just nominated, you haven't won it. But when the first winner was Maurice Sendak, and when Catherine had the great writers for children, I would be intimidated if we won and someone else would have to go up and accept it. I just never know. But it has been, I mean, that is pretty unusual, and we're really honored that they recognize this isn't a book donation program. This isn't dumping anything. This is really appreciating what good literature can do for children. And the other thing is, and maybe you've noticed this in the pictures, all of this underscores the need for a physical space that's welcoming. And as you can see, these designs are based on traditional architectural patterns in Zambia. And this was a very unusual architect that we had, who was a Greek woman who did her master's and doctoral studies in architecture here at the University of California in Berkeley, where she met and married a Zambian sociologist. And she studied a very special approach to architecture, which looks at the way people live through centuries and identifies patterns and then uses that to inform contemporary architecture. So this is the result. And it's really, I mean, I've heard from person after person that it gives them a great deal of pride, because they're not just looking at Western buildings and thinking that's the end all and be all, but this is their own culture. And it does make a difference in people feeling welcome. We have had funding from USAID to build all of this infrastructure from this program called American Schools and Hospitals Abroad. But one thing that at this point in time, a lot of our supporters and friends are asking about is if what's happened with USAID has affected us. And it hasn't, because we have never, ever been dependent on USAID for our operations. And I think that's a really, really important point for people to understand about USAID and the future of USAID. The American Schools and Hospitals Abroad program actually predated USAID. It was part of the State Department, and it built major tertiary education and research centers. The oldest one being the American University of Beirut, but American universities all over the place. And these, as you'll see, that's the Labuto Model American Youth Library that was funded by ASHA. So this ASHA program, which I believe still exists now in the State Department, only funds construction and purchase of durable commodities. So we used it to build our buildings, to buy computers and put in solar power and build all the physical infrastructure, including purchase of a whole book collection, etc. And so because we've been able to sort of survive because of that. And there wasn't really anything, USAID or the State Department were funding things like PEPFAR, et cetera, but those were one-off projects. But this infrastructure is still there and will still be there, including a Center for Training and Administration. This is actually showing a sign for a grant that we got that's in the aftermath of a fire that burnt down the reading room that was there predating our funding. We knew when that building burnt down that there was actually a whole collection of materials and everything on the boat set by World Vision on its way to Zambia that was going to let us completely rebuild again. So things actually happened in kind of a miraculous way too, I have to say. A year ago, a little over a year ago, we launched our last USAID funded facilities, which is this training center. In addition to renovating what we call our model library in the middle of Lusaka, we also have this training center that we'll be using for further to share our experience with other libraries in Zambia, et cetera. Other things about this funding and development: libraries are a continuing institution. Kids need to count on us to know that we're going to be there. We're now into generations, and project funding doesn't, can't support that.
Hi, I just want to say this is amazing work and congratulations for all the great work that you're doing. My question is the culture of reading is such a challenge in this day and age. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to, was it hard to teach the value of picking up a book and reading it? Because I think in the context, particularly in a lot of countries on the continent, reading a book for children is sometimes kind of like it's a behavior change needed. So I'm just curious, how did you build culture of reading and actually picking up a live book? And once you depart it, once you leave, is the behavior, does it still continue?
I left a long time ago. I mean, I spend about a month out of every year in Zambia since we moved away from there in 2001. So I was a librarian back here in this country. I don't see any difference between children here and children there when you have a really good book to read to them. I actually used to, for a while, when my kids were young, work at one of the world's best children's bookstores that used to be here called Cheshire Cat Books in Northwest DC. And, I've sold books to lots and lots of mothers who said, or parents who said, my child is a reluctant reader, isn't interested. Put something that's really good in front of them, sit with them, cuddle with them, and read with them. I haven't seen any resistance. People, I can tell you this Young Mothers, this baby lap time program just is immediately popular. People love it. And singing and art and drama and other ways of communicating are also what lead people to books. We have never encountered any resistance. In fact, traditionally in countries in that area, because I maybe know more about that than people picking up reading here or reading culture here, people revere books. There just aren't, the publishing industry has been sort of decimated. The book donation or book dumping activities that sometimes happen has sort of hurt. I mean, when you're a kid and you go into a place and there's not an interesting book to read, I wouldn't want to read it. So I really do think that it is no different, and that the culture of reading is there when the culture of providing good things to read